could be argued that we are now in the midst of a coup d'etat in slow motion. Democracy is weakening. Corporatism is strengthening. Yet none of us has chosen this route for our society, in spite of which our elites, quite happily, continue down it.
This is a multi-lane highway, a kind of savage laceration that runs directly over the center of Camden, New Jersey, so that commuters in and out of Philadelphia never have to see this city, this sacrifice zone. And that's what we've done. We've rendered those trapped in these sacrifice zones invisible. These people have been not just rendered invisible through infrastructure, but they've been rendered invisible through a media which doesn't report their stories at all. And we should also note that they're completely trapped. They can't get loans. Rents are actually quite high in Camden, although you're living in dilapidated conditions. And this was one of the major manufacturing centers of the United States. You used to have RCA Victor, the famous Italian tenor Caruso, used to come here to record. Campbell's Soup, one of the largest companies in the country, was here. This was a major port up until World War II. A lot of battleships were built here. I think just in the port in World War II, 35,000 people were employed. I'm a great admirer of the Canadian intellectual John Ralston Saul, who used the term corporate coup d'etat in his book, The Unconscious Civilization. It was a very important book for me because it gave me the vocabulary to understand that corporate coup d'etat, how it was carried out, and how it expressed itself in our society.
In 1995, writing something like that felt really risky because I was essentially saying, you know, Mussolini won the Second World War. It was his proposal, corporatism, that theoretically was defeated the Second World War, and I was really arguing that was the way of organizing society which had become more and more powerful.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
And I was slightly covering my bets by saying that it was a coup d'etat in slow motion because I was feeling my way into it. Nobody ever said anything like that.
When I sign this bill into law, America will have the lowest marginal tax rates and the most modern tax code among major industrialized nations.
Where I guess I was wrong was that it wasn't in slow motion. It was really very fast. When you think about it, it was really a matter of a couple of decades.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And there's no question that the coup d'etat has happened. We're well into that world. We're well into a corporatist world.
But this crisis that we're in, maybe we want to call it a legitimacy crisis, right? The status quo or the legitimating framework of capitalism, right, that has sort of guided us over the past 3 decades. And this kind of organizing system has really lost legitimacy. The main reason is simply that it's been a project that has benefited elites enormously. And despite all of the kind of rhetoric of how much, market flexibility will help workers, how much free trade will help, average people become more skilled and get better jobs, the reality is ordinary working families are not doing well. In fact, they're doing substantially worse than they were doing a few decades ago.
Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
So this kind of rolling coup d'etat has created a system that is, at least in its political veneer, is burlesque in character. And that gave rise to Trump. The elites, they look at Trump as an embarrassment, which he is. I mean, he's idiotic, he's narcissistic, he's incompetent, he's lazy. But Trump at least was astute enough to realize that he had to give the corporate CEOs, Wall Street, what they wanted, which was the tax cut.
Deductions that, in essence, are temporary for the middle class, but are long-term for his wealthy friends in real estate, in private equity, etc.
He gave the military a 10% budget increase, which they didn't even ask for. And he deregulated industries like the EPA. And he stacked the courts with corporate-friendly judges. And so they tolerate him.
For a number of very hardcore economic libertarians, particularly billionaires and individuals like the Koch brothers, they've made very clear since the early 70s that they would like to see a system that rewards property owners, that is a democracy that's set up to represent those with money, those with economic power. And that's the government we have today, because it's been shaped and crafted by billionaires that are hoping to ensure that democracy doesn't exist, that instead we have just a constellation of powerful interest groups.
It was basically saying individuals cannot be the source of legitimacy in society. It has to be done on the basis of self-interest. It has to be done on this basis of specialist groups. It's astonishing when you read this stuff and you see the extent to which that idea of group interests versus the responsibility of the citizen has become increasingly powerful over the decades.
Better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. That's a famous Mussolini quote. You retweeted it.
And look, Mussolini was Mussolini. It's okay to, it's a very good quote. It's a very interesting quote. And I know it, I saw it. I saw what, I know who said it, but what difference does it make whether it's Mussolini or somebody else? It's certainly a very interesting quote.
You want to be associated with a fascist?
No, I want to be associated with interesting quotes.
I think this particular time in American history, including Trump, is one of the most important periods of the history, including the revolution. And I say that carefully as a historian, because they've run out of options. And what you see is Donald Trump is the end of the option of a corporate-dominated system. It may go to fascism. It's not at fascism yet, thankfully. The possibility of something approaching fascism, particularly if there is violence, particularly if it's in the black community, something of repression, attack on civil liberties, is certainly possible and could be very ugly. Could be very ugly.
When you have a system of power where a tiny group of people have all of it, or most of it, you have 8 people who control half the wealth. When you have a tiny group of people who have all the power, you have to have some means to make sure the rest of us don't get together and take it back.
You can see that the CNN logo has been superimposed onto the other fighter's face.
What all these tweets reveal about the thinking of the most powerful man in the world and his priorities, and some would argue his humanity.
By now it is obvious that Trump is actually a bad negotiator.
This symbiotic relationship between Trump and his so-called adversaries in CNN and MSNBC, it's kind of phony when you get right down to it. I mean, CNN made $1 billion last year. Cable news companies will steadily gain and make money during the course of the election season. And then as soon as the election happens, their profits will drop off. That did not happen with Trump.
He gets 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream with his chocolate cream pie instead of the single scoop for everyone else.
They've continued to make money. They're making bank like never before. And Trump is definitely the reason. Everybody understands this.
Trump is the symptom. He's not the disease. The system was already so corrupt. And the anger towards the elites in both the Democratic and the Republican Party was so pronounced that his vulgarity actually gave voice to a large segment of the American public that was sick of being betrayed and lied to. We know from 2008 that the segment of the population that has suffered the most economically are African American households, because they can put forth a black face or a woman. It functions as a brand. And that's what Obama was. Obama was a brand. And that's why after he won in 2008, Advertising Age gave Obama its top annual award, which was Marketer of the Year.
I love you too.
The corporate state doesn't mind having somebody like a Trump around. It's sort of embarrassing. But they don't really mind providing he brings the taxes down and providing that he gives them contracts and providing that he does what they want. If he gets too annoying, they get rid of him. It isn't clear to what extent he understands that he is a sort of, a dancing puppet or doll.
It's so good to be here again, Sean. You're the greatest ratings when I'm on your show, don't you?
People who spent a lot of time and money getting the Supreme Court to remove controls on spending on elections, putting in place laws that have to do with how corporations will run. Those people are watching carefully to see the extent to which is this boy our boy or not. Can we really get enough use out of him?
The most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen.
Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again.
Get your ball. Get your ball. Mine too. That's our storage one. And that's the one back there. My husband lost his job, and we were scrapping down here. So we lost our house like 9 years ago. We went down here almost 9 years ago. When our house got foreclosed on, we just stayed here because it was close to the scrapyard. And here we are now.
It seems there's no good news when it comes to the housing market. Sales of existing homes plunged 8.6% in November as compared to October.
In just 6 months, 3 of the 5 biggest independent firms on Wall Street have now disappeared.
9 years ago, a lot of families went downhill, broke apart, lost their families, their jobs, their houses. We weren't the only ones.
I was walking by one day, and I just happened to peek up here. It was still dark out, though the sun hadn't came up yet. And I seen a guy just sitting up there, kind of looked like he was sleeping or whatever. So I just kept walking. The guy was up there, and he was overdosed, and he was dead. He must have sat there all night. He must have either froze to death or the overdose itself killed him. He still had the needle hanging out of his arm. And then everybody comes running by. They're like, "Oh my God, where do you get that at?" Because everybody wants to go to the spot. You know what I mean? It's a pretty sad situation going on out here right now.
I wish these politicians would come down here and walk in our shoes just for a day, so they can see the life that we live.
So these are sacrifice zones, places that capitalism exploited and destroyed for profit, and left behind misery, poverty, environmental devastation. What have you seen in terms of patterns, like over, let's say, the last couple years? Has it been stable, or are things getting worse? How would you describe?
Well, I know I've been here going on 9 years, and over the past couple of years, we are feeding more families. And I'm talking about the husband, the wife, and the children. 20% might be actually living on the street. The rest of them may be in low-income housing or something like that.
200 people might come in on the first day of the month, and 400 people might come in on the last day of the month. But it's the people that are coming in towards the end of the month with the children. And they tell us, "I'm here because I can't pay my electric bill and feed my kids."
Why? Why do you think that is?
Because I think that in spite of the fact that the economy has improved for a segment of the population, the people that are at the bottom, life really hasn't changed, and it's probably even gotten harder for them.
Hi. I'm Chris. How are you?
This is Belton Adams.
Belton Adams.
But everybody calls him Adam.
Okay.
So this is Chris Hedges. Adam graduated from our program. God, how many years ago, Adam?
Actually, 2010.
Where were you in prison?
I was in Southern State.
Southern's not good.
Southern was bad. It was all right.
That's where all the white Aryan guards are.
But one guard has little black babies hanging from a tree, tattooed to his arm.
You kidding?
Yes.
What were you doing before you went in prison?
I was selling drugs. I was using drugs. You know what I mean? And that was my lifestyle, selling and using drugs.
Right.
When you go to prison, you're gonna come out different. You might come out better.
Right.
You might come out crazier.
Yeah, that's right.
You may come out worse.
No.
But you're going to change. This place is a God-sent place because you see the people come in. Some of these people that come in here used to be conductors, teachers, they had good trades.
Yeah.
But just between mental health and drugs, they grabbed them and put them in the system.
How many kids do you have?
I have 6.
6 kids. Are you working?
Yes.
Where do you work?
I'm a crossing guard for Camden, New Jersey Police Department.
So how many hours a day do you work?
I work 4 hours a day.
Were you in prison?
I was.
Where? Which one?
On Southwood.
Southwoods?
Yeah. I gotta get my own place. I'm trying to get my own place, but it's kind of hard, you know. Nobody want to help you. I mean, I'm on my own.
You see cities that have been sacrificed. Youngstown, Ohio, one of the steel capitals of the world. What these capitalists have done in cities like Camden, in cities like Youngstown, in southern West Virginia, they're doing everywhere. Reconfiguring the global economy into an incredibly wealthy global oligarchic class.
Listen, don't take this the wrong way, but you sound like a left-wing nutbar.
I don't usually go on shows where people descend to character assassination. If you want to discuss issues, that's fine, but I mean, this sounds like Fox News, and I don't go on Fox News. Look, you have had very eloquent writers, people like John Ralston Saul in Canada, who have laid this out with, you know, incredible lucidity. And to somehow attack this critique by calling someone a engages in the kind of trash talk that's polluted the corporate airways.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We like hearing your thoughts.
It'll be the last time.
Thank you all for being here. This very incredible group of world-class business leaders. That's what you are.
These CEOs are, in some cases, pulling compensation packages in the billions of dollars, often defrauding their own shareholders.
So this is the bill right here, and I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this.
These corporations and banks, what did they do with the tax cuts? Well, they bought back their own stock.
It's $170.8 billion. That's how much in buybacks this year. That is the most we've seen this far into a calendar year ever.
Why? Because if the stock goes up, the compensation packages for the managers of these corporations goes up. It's not good for the economy. It's not even good for their company.
Corporations are literally going wild over this.
There's a business term, harvesting. They're harvesting themselves. That's what Lehman Brothers did.
The 62-year-old Wall Street tycoon raked in nearly $500 million between 2000 and 2007.
The sort of old school free market, low taxes, low everything, government doesn't provide anything for anybody kind of conservatism. That is the policy preferences of the tiny 8 rich dudes who own half the wealth and the, you know, layer of rich people underneath them. And it is not popular. So you have to get it by other means. And so you see things like voter suppression, building more prisons, and disenfranchising people who have spent time in them. You see gerrymandering. You see all sorts of undemocratic practices that are used to make sure that people who might vote their own interests can't vote, aren't represented when they do vote. And then you just see people running like Trump, promising to bring jobs back to their states. And then what they do once in office is a big old bait and switch.
And it's this kind of insane attitude where they're just looting and stealing as fast as they can as everything collapses.
This used to be a heck of a steel town at one time.
just like losing a good friend.
As far as I remember, Grandpa worked here all his life. Back in the 60s, as I was a kid, he used to tell me that one day this mill would close down and this valley would cry. I said, there's no way. It's too big. It's huge. It goes from miles this way to way miles that way. And I said, it's never going to close. And by golly, his words were true. This used to be the pride of the nation. It's gone. It's gone. Along with this and hundreds of other mills just like it. But this one right here, this was a pride of the nation.
On September 19th, 1977, Sheet and Tube, now a subsidiary of the Likes Corporation, announced that it was closing down most of its Campbell plant. 5,000 steel workers, many of them skilled veterans of 20 to 30 years, lost their jobs.
It's hard to believe this is happening. After working here for so many years, it's hard to believe that we're put out on the street and don't know what we're going to do.
It really started in the late 70s when these companies were able to move their production offshore. So you saw the ending of a number of steel companies, the shifting of manufacturing to the global south, where the wages were lower, where the environmental rules were not either existent or enforced. And that's the beginning of this concept of these transnationals. They had the technology to do it, they had the transportation systems to do it, and frankly, governments weren't stopping them.
And I just remember one day I was working and the boss come up to me and says, that's it, we're going home. I thought, we're going home early, why? He said, because we're closed. And they closed the doors on us there. I don't know what to say. It's a crying shame. It really is. I was a long-time Democrat, but this last election before it came along, I switched parties. I switched parties. I'm Republican now, and I think Mr. Trump is doing a great job for us. I think he's trying. You're going to help the country you work for, and I think he's trying to do that. I really do.
Having little to no jobs in the neighborhood causes plenty of strains upon people's emotional state, people's physical state. If you can't feed your family, if you can't pay your bills, that sends you into a major state of depression. When the steel mill shut down, you know, that took a major part of the city away. This was a wedding gown, David's bridal. This is 722 Steel Street. We acquired this property from the Mahoney County Land Bank for $1,000. The house was pretty much, you know, just abandoned. You know, so there's a lot of stuff that's still left over in the house. We took a lot out already, but we still have tons to go. Shouldn't sound, you know, we just have to clear a lot of the furnishings that was left over. Whoever was living here, they weren't here long. Maybe about a year, 18 months max, and then they were gone. I did run across a suicide note that was left, I guess, either by the husband or the father of the house. He stated that he was in a bad position in his life right now, and he was sorry for everything he had done. And whoever was reading the note, if they were actually reading the note, they would find him hanging in the garage. Me, if I came home and seen a note like that, it probably would scare the heck out of me. I wouldn't even want to see what was in the garage. I would just be getting up out of here, which seems like that's what the family did because they left everything behind. Clothing, toys, bedding, furniture, you know, whatever was here was left. Mortgage companies, you know, foreclosed on a lot of properties. The areas got bad, you know, drug infested, you know, drugs, you know, just pretty much saturated the city, you know, which caused a lot of people to pretty much flee the area.
The corporate coup d'etat was begun in the early 1970s. Lewis Powell, in his 1971 memo, which he wrote when he was an attorney for the Chamber of Commerce, he later became a Supreme Court justice, talked about what he called the assault on the free enterprise system. And he called on corporations to use their power, and in particular their money, to build counter institutions and to take over and destroy liberal institutions. Institutions that traditionally gave a voice to the working class and cared about the rights and needs of the citizenry.
Tonight, Ralph Nader charges the Detroit car companies with running risks that can't hurt them, but do hurt us.
Quote, perhaps the single most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader.
And so if they do anything to help New York City, it will be to help the banks.
Who, thanks largely to the media, has become a legend in his own time and an idol of millions of Americans.
Not here to excuse, condone, or justify in any way our investigating Mr. Nader.
I don't want to have a climate in this country where one has to have an ascetic existence and steely determinations in order to speak truthfully and candidly and critically of American industry.
The Powell Memorandum was a combination of illusion and paranoia. He basically said to the business community, you got to hire a lot more lobbyists swarming over Congress. You got to pour a lot more money into their campaigns, both parties, Republican, Democrat. You got to get out on the campuses and get right-wing speakers to combat progressive speakers. He had the whole 180 degrees.
Are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
People like Ronald Reagan, in an early form of modern populism, began switching everything back to, if you like, a pre-Teddy Roosevelt period.
My fellow Americans, in recent days, all of us have been swamped by a sea of economic statistics, some good, some bad, and some just plain confusing. You see that red line? It represents the rate of unemployment from 1968 through the present. The Congress should act on regulatory reform to help make government more economical and efficient, and the private sector more productive.
With tax reform and budget control, our economy will be free to expand to its full potential. That's our economic program for the next 4 years. We're going to turn the bull loose.
Thank you all very much. What you've done for me is better than a hot tip.
Equivalent things were starting to happen in Italy, in England. You could already see the cracks opening up so that gaps between rich and poor began growing.
I am trying to tell you there is no program or promise that a president can make that the federal government can come in and wave a wand and do this.
The only voice you heard was this voice of the inevitability of the marketplace.
I hear you, and millions of other men and women like you stand for the values of hard work, thrift, commitment to family, and love of God that made this country so great and will make us great again.
We saw the rise of what I would call the faux liberal class. Clinton spoke in that traditional feel your pain language of liberalism, and yet assiduously carried out an assault against the citizenry on behalf of corporate power.
Today, as I sign the North American Free Trade Agreement into law, we are ready to compete, and we can win.
So it's under Clinton that you get NAFTA.
NAFTA allowed manufacturers, particularly auto manufacturers in Canada and the United States, to move their production to Mexico. It was deliberate. They moved their production, their companies there because they had such low wages in Mexico, which did not help the Mexican workers, by the way. It's just false to say that Mexico won. It was a lose-lose-lose for the people and a win-win-win for the corporations.
Down the hall to the White House East Room he came with 3 of his predecessors in tow. But the real effort by Mr. Clinton today was to say to doubters that he's prepared to fight for the treaty.
This has happened all over the world, but particularly in the United States, the radical decline of the labor movement and unions, which were a political force, even more importantly, than they were on the shop floor. The United States always had weak unions to kind of countervail against the corporations. At the peak, they were 34% of the labor force. But they are now down to 11% total and only 6% in the private sector. So essentially the countervailing power base, an institutional power base, is gone. And part of that was an all-out attack by organized corporations who went after them.
Today we are taking an historic chance to make welfare what it was meant to be, a second chance, not a way of life.
It's under Clinton that you get the destruction of welfare, and originally 70% of the recipients of our welfare program were children. It's under Clinton that you get the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill.
Crime has been a hot political issue, used too often to divide us, while the system makes excuses for not punishing criminals and doing the job.
Because the Democrats were taking back the issue of law and order from the Republicans. Laws to incarcerate double, triple sentences, 3 strikes you're outlaws, so that people could go to prison for life for nonviolent crimes. So there was an explosion in the prison industry, which of course is a form of social control for deindustrialized pockets.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
And they used all the coded words, super predators, law and order. As the pillage was being carried out, the white majority was being indoctrinated with this idea that marginal, usually poor, people of color were responsible for the destruction of the country, the assault on their national identity.
John, you all set? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Twice over the past 8 months, I traveled to the Midwest, to a city that has become a metaphor for many, for jobs lost, factories closed, and the disappearance of the 9-to-5 middle class.
40 years ago, this coming Tuesday marks the beginning of the end of the steel-dominated Youngstown area's economy.
There are no longer smokestacks, and much of it is covered by vegetation.
Okay.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
It's depressing getting down here, to be honest with you. You can't talk about the Mahoning Valley and not talk about the steel and manufacturing.
Them smokestacks reaching like the arms of God.
I used to wake up in the morning to the noise of the blast furnace rumbling. Now I wake up to them tearing the facility down.
Youngstown District's largest steel mills would be shut down by Friday.
Trying to recover from that, they passed NAFTA. In New York, NAFTA's great. Wall Street, good stuff, NAFTA. And on the West Coast, NAFTA's great because you got the Port of Los Angeles. You have the ocean there, and that's coming from China and Mexico and all that stuff. So all those free traders, they're making millions. But the people here, they're hurting. Their jobs are gone. Their jobs are gone.
Built the tanks and bombs that won this country's wars. We gave our sons a career.
Well, it can be hard to go by that plant now and know that thousands used to work there.
GM employees learned Friday afternoon that up to 1,500 of them would be laid off when the second shift is eliminated in mid-June.
The county says Euro American Finance Network, Inc. owns the property. The county treasurer's office has been trying to collect taxes for 5 years and is in the foreclosure process.
This is truly a metaphor for what is wrong with both America's healthcare system, which through mergers and corporatization take the community away from their own health care and from their own facility. They did not need to abandon this. This is another example of being able to walk away from your responsibility and then putting it back on the community that's already desperate.
Once I made you rich enough.
It's here, in the Youngstown area, where I found Bill Amashi.
I don't like to live in a trailer park. I mean, it's not that it's a bad park, but it's not who I am. Right. It's not just me. There's 1,100 steelworkers, not to mention all the other facilities that went under that supported the mill. A lot of people lost their livelihood.
What role do you think politicians play in all of that?
I think they've been bought by corporate America and they're puppets. Every single one. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. They're all corporate owned. I don't think they can think for themselves. I think they just do as they're told.
So you wonder, who was it? Who are the people who voted for Donald Trump? Quite a few were people who voted twice for Barack Obama and voted for Bernie Sanders. That was even more astounding. That made me say, there's no way I can simply sit here and guess what folks are thinking. I need to understand what's going on in people's minds and why the situation is far more complex than what we give it credit for.
And they actually brought up workers from Mexico. And the workers here had to train those workers that they knew were going to take their jobs. And then they had the workers pack up the machines and ship them down to Mexico. The thing is, got a lone train coming through, but there used to be a ton of trains coming through here.
A lot of trains coming through?
Not anymore. This valley has a very rich Democratic tradition. They voted Democrat almost always until President Trump came along. Kind of upset the apple cart. When I saw Hillary Clinton really struggling with trade issues and NAFTA, and I sent a 4-page memo. I predicted in that memo that she's bleeding badly blue-collar voters. And those are the voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin that could have turned the election. And her standing on a stage in Columbus, I mean, I don't mean to beat her up because I really do love the woman, and I worked my off for her. But she stood on a stage in Columbus, Ohio, and looked out and said,
"We're going to put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business.
You got a blue-collar job, you." That's what they heard her say. He never came around and said, "Hey, we're going to put people out of work." He said, "Hey, I'm going to put you back to work." When people are thirsty, they're going to drink shitty water. They don't care the water's dirty.
Yo, man. How are you, Bill?
How you doing, guy?
Good to see you. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
You know? How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm Philip.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Sarah, I've heard about you. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
We got snow day?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Last time I saw you, which, you know, the weather was a lot better, of course, and there's been this this tax cut, most, of course, which went to corporations, but some which went to middle-class, working-class people. Are you seeing any difference in your own paycheck?
About $20. Right at.
What do you do with those $20?
What can you do with $20? It's gas. You know, it might help pay a bill.
And what about the tariffs? I know it's, you crossed the border to work into Pennsylvania.
Yes, sir.
And has that had any impact so far, to your knowledge?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to applaud the president for the steel tariffs. We needed these years ago. But ironically, now this company that I'm in, you know, most of the mills, like the 2 mills I put down, you just can't find slabs made in America. Our company has to go to Russia to get them.
Donald Trump has basically used the issue of steel and the conditions of steel workers, those who've been laid off, those who lost their jobs, as a talking point. And now he says, and seems to have many people believe, that he is leading the charge to bring steel back to the United States and to Youngstown.
In order to bring steel back to this area, you have to have somebody that's willing to invest in building new blast furnaces, new electric arc furnaces that melt steel down and put it in slab form. You'll never see 1,200 to 1,500 people working in a facility in a steel mill anymore.
All right, News Radio 570 WKBN and Ron Firm. Good afternoon. 3:07 as we get underway here today. All right, I think it takes courage to do what President Trump is doing. I think it takes courage. As I said, he is a president that doesn't view us as a marketplace. He views us as a nation.
I'm not speculating on what's going to happen. I'm looking at what's taking place right here and right now when it comes to Trump. And I'm looking at what's happening in this community. You know what? That's where I'm at on it, Moses.
What I want to say about him is his policies, contrary to what you believe, have not benefited middle America. That's what I want to talk to the voters about. Let's look at his policies.
David, I just said these guys, we have people getting bonuses and raises, including locally as a result of that tax cut. It has benefited members of this community. Hold that thought. We'll come back.
Ron, whatever happened to you worrying about the deficit? All of a sudden, it's not.
I'll be more than happy to talk about that, because if, as Trump says, if we can get 4 to 5% growth, guess what? A lot of problems are solved.
Fighting broke out overnight between rival
that allows
factions
coal
among
companies
the Israelis
to dump
Syrian
coal
border.
product into our rivers is not a regulation that's going to create one job. Okay, it is a regulation designed to take care of his billionaire buddies.
We'll talk more about that when I come back in a minute. News Radio 570 WKBN.
Unemployment here in Ohio is up 85% over the last 8 years since George Bush took office. It's the highest that it's been in 16 years. You can't afford 4 more years of the failed economic theories that say we should give more and more to millionaires and billionaires and hope that prosperity trickles down on everybody else.
In response to President Obama's 2008 election, there was a counter-revolution. Billionaires and powerful corporate interests were terrified that Obama and Democrats in Congress would tax the wealthy, that they would redistribute wealth in this country, that they would enact overreaching healthcare reform. And in response to that, the corporate interests and billionaires, they funded hate groups and front groups to oppose the Obama agenda and to whip up hate in society to divide Americans on race and class and religion.
For centuries, Muslims built mosques where they won military victories. Now they want to build a mosque at ground zero, where Islamic terrorists killed 3,000 Americans. It's like the Japanese building at Pearl Harbor.
They placed advertisements on television scapegoating Muslims, claiming that criminal justice reform will put dangerous criminals on the streets, showing pictures of African Americans and conjuring racial fear.
美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
This was not because billionaires and major corporations necessarily believed in these messages, but they wanted to undermine political support for economic reform.
The Supreme Court today handed down a landmark ruling on campaign finance laws.
In a 5-4 decision, the court overturned century-old restrictions on corporations from using their funds to advocate for a specific candidate. The majority opinion affirms corporations have First Amendment rights and that the government can't limit their political speech.
They have done things like allowed unlimited infusions of corporate cash as the right to petition the government or a form of free speech. It's a complete inversion. So your constitutional rights are still exist on paper, but have been reinterpreted to essentially bolster corporate power. And that has left us utterly defenseless.
As a person, you're worried all that there's too much money in politics.
If you believe that, we ought to go back to monarchy, that the people are such sheep
that they just swallow whatever they see on television or read in the newspapers?
Capitalism at its finest. How much is enough, Gordon? The richest 1% of this country owns half our country's wealth, $5 trillion. I create nothing. I own. We make the rules, pal. The news, war, peace, famine, upheaval, the price of a paperclip. We pick that rabbit out of the hat while everybody sits out there wondering how the hell we did it. Now, you're not naive enough to think we're living in a democracy, are you, buddy?
I would argue that we're already well engaged in the act of cutting our own arteries, whether it's the throat or the wrists. If we're slipping into such a foolish act, it's largely because we've allowed ourselves to be convinced by our own elites that the democratic system is a secondary product of the free market.
I think that even the people in Youngstown who voted for Obama thought that there was a real turning point, that we could get a black president, and that would set everything in motion. That we didn't recognize that the change was solely happening in the spectacle of who was in the White House. Those kind of sinews of the system were always there, and I think Obama knew how to play them very well, but he was also playing to an audience. And I think that once that audience started to catch on that their lives weren't changing, then we reverted back to not only what is familiar, but what is almost hyper-familiar, and that has been the fierce lurch back to the right.
At a time where we had 7.5 miles of mills, okay? Continuous. 7.5 miles of mills. There's none left now, okay? And all our manufacturing left this country, all these things, and I blame it on the politicians. It's the establishment. It's Washington, D.C. They got their little clique. They got their thing. They don't care about anything else. And it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, they're all the same. They're all, I'm sorry to use that language, but they're all, they're in there for one thing, they're in there to get elected. The reason Donald Trump's in there is because he's a celebrity, or he did this, or he did that. He is in there because he is not one of them. And we are so frustrated, we had to vote him in. If Donald Trump goes away, we'll find another Trump. Believe me, we'll find another one.
The people dreamed this country. The people built this country. And it's the people who are making America great again.
The Clintons and the Obamas, although they talked about families and children and justice and so on, maintained these rights for corporations, promoted the right of their companies to do whatever they want around the world. In a strange way, it was those who might oppose Trump right now who set the stage for him to be elected. It was the very policies that hollowed out North America. I mean, we created huge pockets of poverty. We've never had in 100 years the same difference between rich and poor. The class difference is incredible. They set the stage for a savior. Obama was supposed to be that savior, and he wasn't. And what happens after a savior fails you, you look to something very different. They set the table, in my opinion, for Donald Trump's success.
Do you find this contradictory in any way to the a cabinet full of millionaires, a situation where some of them have been accused of misusing their offices in terms of the lavishness of those offices, so on and so forth, to Trump's stated promise to drain the swamp, if you will?
I don't think he drained it. I think he moved it into the White House. So he didn't drain the swamp, he just moved it in there. I think every politician has probably abused their office. Why don't we totally drain the swamp? Why don't we clean up D.C. altogether? Why aren't we, the people, more actively involved?
Donald Trump's major contribution so far has been to completely devalue the idea of regulatory oversight. And so you have Betsy DeVos, Department of Education, or Scott Pruitt at the EPA. And these people are essentially trying to dismantle government oversight from within.
The EPA's regulators were putting people out of jobs by the hundreds of thousands.
And then you add to it some legislative gambits like the tax cut, like this recent Bank Lobbyist Act and the partial repeal of the Dodd-Frank Act. They've been on their wish list for ages, this stuff.
Thousands, tens of thousands of lobbyists essentially are writing the legislation. Every once in a while, a bill will be submitted and the lobbying firm's name will be on it because the congressman messed up, by not taking it off.
My question, Representative Gottwald, somewhat mirrors what Representative Mahoney. I'm just curious, does the legislation have some connection to ALEC?
This bill didn't come to me from ALEC, in answer to your question.
Well, the reason I ask is because earlier you passed out a handout that says Gottwald at the top, and it says Healthcare Compact, and there's a logo right in the middle of that page. And I went to the ALEC website, and there's exactly the same font, the same size, and the same logo.
President Trump keeping another campaign promise after the president vowed to, quote, do a big number on the Dodd-Frank Act.
Years of financial sector lobbying have succeeded in persuading the House of Representatives to approve the biggest rollback of banking rules since Dodd-Frank.
It's the bank lobbyists came to Capitol Hill and pressured lawmakers to weaken their safeguards, to roll back those regulations. Although it was mostly Republicans who voted for this measure, Democrats, who are some of the biggest recipients of bank money, also voted with the Republicans to roll back the signature accomplishment of the Obama administration. Hey, Congressman Streichert? Hey, do you have a second? My name's Lee Fong. I'm a reporter with The Intercept. Congressman Reichert? Hi, my name's Lee Fong. Why is Congress moving to remove some of those Dodd-Frank protections designed to prevent another crisis?
Those protections were actually extended into the community banking sector, which did not have a cascade effect.
I helped write Dodd-Frank, and I've defended it for 9 years. And like a lot of people, I think that there were areas in which Dodd-Frank sat a little heavy on our smaller institutions, which are, in some instances, having difficulty lending, making small loans to small businesses.
I know you have a history in the banking sector. You worked at Goldman Sachs. Do you think that had any influence on your decision to vote this way?
This was not a Wall Street bill. This was a bill about providing relief to smaller and community institutions.
So SunTrust and some of these other regional stadium banks are not necessarily small, right?
No, they're not necessarily small.
We're 10 years out from the financial crisis, but Congress has moved to repeal some of these. I think you voted with the Republicans to repeal that, is that right?
I voted to support the community banks. The bill was entirely about the community banks.
Citigroup, along with some of these community bankers and other bank trade associations, really hit the hill. They had a lot of lobbyists working on this.
I didn't have anyone come in sitting, actually.
Do you think that the banking lobby and their campaign donations had any influence the 2008 fiasco?
No.
The banks had no role in that debate?
No, you didn't ask me that question.
Did they have any influence over the vote?
Not on mine.
Banking lobby have any influence on this vote?
Actually, I'll go just the opposite. If you take a look, a lot of the big money center banks weren't thrilled with this. It's the community banks that liked it.
Yes, I did support the community bank bill. And I think when people misrepresent what things are, it makes it really hard.
One last question. You said the regional banks are doing very well. Thank you. All right. Are you concerned that the banking lobby, bank lobbyists had influence over this bill, that they have too much influence here on Capitol Hill?
Absolutely. I think the bank lobby, the gun lobby, the pharma lobby all have too much influence here in Congress. This bill, $250 to $500 million, I mean, the kinds of banks, JP Morgan, Citibank, the kinds of banks that we're talking about are not small banks. So I don't know that anybody with a straight face can say this is an answer to that question. This is, couching small banks in order to give big banks relief from these necessary regulations here.
Thank you so much. Take care. In response to Obama's one effort to clean up influence peddling in Washington, lobbyists simply deregistered and became more secretive. Thousands of lobbyists said, we're not even going to comply with the registration system, and we're going to move into the shadows and continue to influence government, but without disclosing what we're doing. On paper, there are something like 9,000 or 10,000 registered lobbyists, but in reality, the number is closer to 100,000. On paper, lobbyists spend about $3 billion or so every year influencing the federal government, but in reality, that number is closer to 9 or 10 billion. You served in the Bush administration, now at AM General, a company that's received a lot of military contracts. How do you feel about this issue of senior military officials, government officials, going to large firms that receive major military contracts? As executive vice president of a major defense firm that's received billions of dollars in defense contracts, do you interface with the Pentagon? Have you spoken to either Obama administration officials or Trump administration officials on contracting issues? Excuse me, Friend Townsend, do you have just a quick moment? I don't want to take too much of your time.
Say, could I host a Welcome to Washington fundraiser for you down at my law firm on K Street? Absolutely. At $500 a head, you could pick up 20, 25 grand to help you get started.
The history of the species is very much a history of domination, exploitation, oppression, envy, hatred, contempt. And then the countervailing forces, the countervailing voices against domination, against hatred, against envy. So you've got this struggle going on. But that's what democracy is all about. How do you interrupt the dominant cycles of domination, oppression, hatred, envy, and resentment with concern for others, compassion, and especially a concern for the most vulnerable, the poor, and the weak. And the history of democracy is like the history of the blues. Because the blues is about catastrophe, overwhelming catastrophe that seems to suffocate every effort of improvement.
Not two of you know. Well, I had to walk through.
And yet one still keeps keeping on. One still tries to tell the truth. One still tries to fight for justice. Looks like you're gonna make a breakthrough. Good morning, heartache. Here it is again.
I was born.
But it's also one in which you recognize as elements of surprise. So when you have breakthrough, the breakthroughs are real. And so it is in democracy.
I didn't have nothing.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
So there's one step forward, two steps back. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. That's the history of who we are as a species. We are both wonderful and terrible at the same time. We are aspirational and visionary on the one hand, and we are wretched and oppressive on the other. And the blues understands that. So you got to keep track of both poles at the same time and always preserve not your optimism, you preserve your hope. You're a prisoner of hope. The corporate elites, they want to divide us. They want to divide and conquer. It is a strategy as old as the elites who emerged from the cave in the history of the species.
Violent crime on the rise in some cities in California, Los Angeles and San Francisco in particular.
But their biggest threat are criminal gangs and it's other black males who are involved in this crime and violence.
So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble. We'll be right back.
That's the fundamental threat. And they do all that they can to cultivate the divisions. All that they can.
Big Noise Inc. is the record label that we started. First artist was Real Buck.
That's my cousin, and his brother was the producer. So we shooting this video. It's called My City. My nephew had got killed. At the beginning of the video, you'll see two of my cousins standing in front of where we do makeshift sheets of rest in peace, had his name and all that. And then 7 days later, my cousin, who I was close with, more like a brother, he was shot down in front of his kids. He was walking into his house. Somebody walked up. He had his daughter, his girl, walked up and shot this man 11 times in the face. You know what I'm saying? Proceeded to shoot him when he was on the ground. What is that? Hairdresser. It's like, you know, our family was a good family, you know what I mean? And but you succumb to your environment. And it's just like that reality. I'm so tired of that cycle that we see in the city. And it happens. You know what I mean? And we had to eat some nights. So I had to go do what I had to do. You know what I mean? Be in these streets and ran these streets for a long time. You know, and I'm just blessed that I'm able to be here and be a parent now. Like, that's my whole focus in life, is just to give my kids a better life than I had.
That's what you should do.
Yeah. We have to understand this in a global way, of course. When you're talking about capitalist modes of production, you're always talking about global realities, because the profit maximization is one that elites are concerned about, gaining access to low-wage markets all around the world, that has devastated so many poor and working people of all colors. A place like Camden, where you have precious black brothers and sisters, you got white supremacy shot through these same capitalist processes. And of course, that's historically the case. Slaveholding capitalism for over 200 years, Jim Crow capitalism for over 90 years, and the Jim Crow Jr. has to do with what? Not just devastating industrial working class, has to do with the escalation of mass incarceration, owing to decrepit educational systems, owing to indecent housing, owing to communities and families that are hollowed out.
The racism, you know, is terrifying. It's core to the problem. So is the sexism, which we don't talk about enough. They are essentially promising to restore a hierarchy in which people know their place, which men get their place. This is what we refer to as patriarchy. This is a society that runs around the sort of structure of a family, where the man is the head of the family, except the man is the head of society.
Camden, you get these white supremacist forces, capitalist forces, patriarchal forces, almost checkmating precious brothers and sisters.
These were not accidental bits and pieces in different places. It all fit together in a very old-fashioned way. It was all really about taking us back to essentially a pre-democratic period. It was all really about a battle that the losers after 1900 had never accepted and had portrayed as a defeat of their right as the owners, as the most powerful people. So bit by bit, they put it back together again. And that's why, you know, in 1995, I felt I had to say things like, we're in the midst of a coup d'etat in slow motion.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Chase, make more.
Busted straight out.
Trying to make your flight.
We've lost the ability to think. Images on screens are ubiquitous.
The truth is, they want to ban every gun in America.
Certainly illegal immigration, DACA, it is 100% about voting.
24 hours a day.
The Democratic push of their Russia narrative, collusion, Trump, Russia narrative, Trump, Russia narrative.
We are bombarded with images, and those images are confused with knowledge.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
We confuse how we are made to feel with knowledge.
My new game is Trump, the game.
We teach success. That's what it's all about. Success. Trump steaks are by far the best tasting, most flavorful beef you've ever had. Because when America is united, America is totally unstoppable. Although I'll be totally honest with you, even if it's not united, we're unstoppable, so don't worry about it.
And understanding how systems of power work, which you can only grasp by investing yourself in a print-based culture, reading John Ralston Saul, reading Noam Chomsky. But in a post-literate society, and the books are still there, but nobody picks them up anymore.
Hello.
Dear brother, how you doing there, man?
Great to meet you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Really great to meet you. Great honor.
Well,
Great honor.
It's mine, no. The question, which America do you want?
Yeah.
But without the real imagination, vision, and courage, shattering the indifference and shattering the callousness. And that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Man, I discern fight back in your text. But how do you conceive of everyday people being actually seized with a fire for a better world, an alternative?
Well, I think they are if they can figure out how to do it. If they can feel that they're involved, that it's about them. And I think the great disaster of the last 30 years is that a large part of the liberal elite has basically given in to a large part of the themes of the basically anti-democratic elite. And so they then created a discourse, a top-down discourse, which excluded people, which really made those people who are the guarantors of democracy, the voter, the citizen, made them feel excluded. And once they feel excluded, they start getting mad, and they get madder.
There's a new day coming, though. There's signs of hope, a younger generation concerned about not just ecological crisis, destruction of the planet, concerned about especially Wall Street.
So how do you think it happens?
Meant so much for us, you know. It's unpredictable, you know. In the end, history is a mystery, just like love and life. You just don't know. None of us have control. No. Even the ruling classes think that they're mighty, but they're not almighty. They're going to fall sooner or later. We don't know what form. We just hope that it's not neo-fascist. We hope that it doesn't return to the most barbaric and bestial of aspects of our condition, the human condition, because it's inside of all of us. You know, it's inside the hatred and the gangster-like proclivities inside every human being.
Hey, it's frozen dinners. Frozen dinners. And there's rolls, there's soups, all kinds of stuff. So whoever's hungry, and it's in date, I help everybody here. Food, clothes, whatever. Advice. Take what you want, guys. There's soups up there, too. That's what I do. Right now, something's telling me I have to be here and help the people here first. When I'm done that, then I'll do me. But I put other people first.
You know, I've always been fascinated by the monarch butterfly, particularly in August. You see them heading south. And of course, they're going to head south across the United States to Mexico, where they'll winter. But it takes about 3 generations to do the round trip. So in fact, no butterfly can be a guide. There is no butterfly who knows how to do this, who knows where to go. They're part of a civilization. They're part of a community. They're part of something which understands without knowing. They're a reminder to me of really how civilizations work. We're all part of something which is deeply, deeply interwoven. And this is the enormous flaw in the corporatist argument, that you could sort of slice everybody up into their interest group and then get somebody who's a kind of, Mussolinian Trump-like figure who uses emotion to hold it all together. That isn't actually the way society works at all.
So in Vasily Grossman's great novel, Life and Fate, he writes about the evils of both communism and fascism, the evils of ideologies that seek to exterminate whole numbers of opponents and people, whether they're condemned because of class or race. And in the novel, he talks about the power of human kindness, which he witnessed as a war correspondent. He was in Stalingrad and went all the way to Berlin. And he said that the power of that human kindness means that it is not humankind that is impotent in the face of evil, but evil that is impotent in the face of humankind. Because it is never able to crush that small kernel of kindness. And I think that's right.
We will not be silenced! We will not be silenced!
I think that we probably only save the world one person at a time.
Just hold it down so the logo will show.
That those small, unheralded acts of compassion are what keep us human, and ultimately are the seeds by which we can rise up again.